Hello everyone. Today we're going to be covering Three.js. Now this is a pretty cool JavaScript framework, of course, because everything's a JavaScript framework these days. It's going to allow you to do some basic animations like you're seeing here, and you can even take these to a pretty advanced level and create fully functional games by using this same framework. So this can function either as your game engine if you'd like, or it can be an animation engine if you're interested in having just some basic animations running around maybe for your portfolio or for a specific page on your website. Of course, we're going to throw all of this into a Rails app so that we can serve this on an actual website. Just to give you an idea, I do have the Three.js examples page open over here. And I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff you can do with it, as you can probably tell from this video. But this is a small little Minecraft geometry clone. There's other options as well, like there's this one on animations and keyframes. There's also character design that you can do. You can do crossfading and all the stuff you'd see with like a regular game engine, right? So all of that's available to you. But for this video, we're just going to cover adding this to a Rails app real quick, and then we'll add in some basic boilerplate code as well. So to get started, I just have a blank Rails app here with VS Code open on the left, and then I have a server open here. Let me actually close my demo server. And basically all we have to do is add Three.js to our application. Now, if you're using npm or yarn, your command is going to be something like yarn add, I think it's just 3. In my case, because I'm using Rails, I'm going to have to type bin/importmap pin and then 3. And that should go out and grab 3 from this URL. You can, of course, also Google Three.js, go to the installation getting started page, and you'll find the link to the CDN if you just want to add it with like a regular script include tag or whatever. Okay, so now we have that. One other thing I want to do is just real quick, I'm going to type Rails G controller pages home because I want to give myself a home page, just something that I can work out of with a basic HTML. Page. And then the other thing I'm going to do is type Rails G Stimulus, and I'm just going to call this Three.js. And that's just me naming a small little JavaScript entry point. So this is Stimulus, Hotwire, and Rails. If you're in anything else, you can just include a basic JavaScript file to work just fine. So now that we have that, I'm going to go ahead and set a root page for the application because right now it's just going to go to this ugly Rails getting started page. So I'm going to open up my config and my routes.rb, change the get to a root and the / to a hash, and then this should change it to a home page. Looks good. Now the next thing we have to do is come into our app, views, pages, and home.html.erb. And basically all we have to do now is just throw in a small tag to include a canvas. So you have two choices. You can either do a regular div, which is just going to be a div, and then you're going to give this a ID if you'd like. You can set the ID equal to main or canvas, whatever. You also have the choice of just creating a canvas up front, in which case with the div, you'd be creating the canvas in JavaScript. If you just create a manual canvas here and then give this an ID equal to main, you can then just grab the canvas like that. Now, because I'm going to be using Stimulus, I have the option of doing a content tag. I can then pass in :canvas to create an HTML canvas. I'll pass in the empty string. That's just the word that goes inside of like a div. So like this p tag as this text, that would go in here. I don't want anything though. I just want an empty canvas. And then after I have the canvas, I'm going to give this some data. I'm going to set this to have a controller, which is going through the Stimulus stuff. Remember, we named this controller Three.js when we generated it a little bit ago. So we're just going to grab the Three.js controller. We can go ahead and save that, come over here, refresh, and we'll see that nothing changes. So what we want to do is open up our Explorer, come into App, JavaScript, and our controllers and our Three.js controller. And then inside of the connect, we're just going to do a console.log, and we're just going to say hello stimulus, and then from whichever element is logging this. So you can see here, this gets console logged, and we can see that we have grabbed the canvas element with this .element. Other option, of course, is you can give your canvas an ID, and then you can do a document.find by ID inside of your JavaScript. But okay, at this point, we have our entry point inside of our JS. We're pretty much good to go now to stop referencing like 30 different frameworks all at once, and we'll just focus on like the Rails way to do this because it's all going to be the same basically. So One thing that we need to do is inside of our app, assets, style sheets, we have a application.css file. We can also create a new one, just call this canvas.css if we would like. And then in here, all we have to do is give our actual canvas a position of fixed. It's going to have a top of 0 and a left of 0. And then we'll want to give this pages h1 and this p tag some styling as well. So we'll just say h1 and p are just going to have a color of FFF. And of course, you could make this more specific if you'd like with some styles or something, or classes or IDs. In this case, I'm just kind of hard coding this because we really don't need to watch me sit here and type CSS for an entire video. And then I'm going to give this a z index of 1 just so that the main tag is on top of the canvas whenever we create it. Because you can't really see it right now, but once we start drawing the canvas, it'll go over this text. So what we want to do is just create a main tag around our page's homepage right here. Then we'll just come up here, we'll grab these two, I'll hold Alt to move them down, and then we can just do a main tag, hit Tab, save this, and then we're pretty good to go here. So now inside of our Three.js controller, we can actually get started on what we want to do here. So there's a couple different components you're going to need. You're going to need a scene, a camera, and a renderer. So your scene is pretty easy to set up. This is just going to be a this.scene is equal to a new 3.scene, which does remind me we actually need to import our 3. So we type import star as all caps 3 from 3. Not my favorite naming convention, but that seems to be what other people do. As is tradition, I learned this like 5 minutes before I made this video, so just a heads up there. I am referencing a Fireship video. I'll have a link to that in the video description. He does other stuff like a whole star field, so I definitely recommend checking that out after you're done here because it is interesting. It's just some of the things change depending on which framework you're in, so I just kind of wanted to cover some of this stuff. So we have our scene here. I'm now going to create a camera. So we'll say this dot camera is equal to a new 3 dot, and then you have a couple options for your cameras, and all of this stuff really has options, and you can find most of them inside of like the Three.js documentation, which I'll have a link to in the video description. But the basic idea is you'll either have like a perspective camera or an orthographic camera. So you can think like your perspective might be your traditional regular RPG game, and then your orthographic might be like your Final Fantasy Tactics type of camera. And then we need to pass in a couple things here. So we got to give it just some basic dimensions so that it has a rough idea of the size that it's looking for, where like the near distance and the far distance clipping happens, I believe. That's based entirely on what happens when I hover over this and what it says. So yeah, it's the vertical field of view, or the FOV, the aspect ratio, the near clipping, and the far clipping, I guess. Okay, so now we have this. If we save this and we refresh, nothing happens. Of course, it's never that simple. Now we want to create a renderer, and for this, we're going to use a new 3.WebGL renderer. So that's pretty cool. I'm going to bump up the font size one more. Once we have this renderer, we can then go ahead and say this.renderer.setSize, and then we can pass in the, let me move this over a little bit more so we can actually see, window.innerWidth and window.innerHeight, because this needs to take in a width and a height. So we just pass in the dimensions of the overall height here. Once that's done, you'll see again, nothing changes. It's really not going to change until we actually start drawing something to the screen. So what we can do now is we can say document.body.append child, and then we can append this .renderer.dom element. There we go. Come over here, refresh, and you'll still see nothing's really happening. So how can we actually get something to appear on the screen? Well, the first thing we can do is we can create some geometry. So this is just the word they use for like a cube or a torus or any other shape that you can really render here. So right here, these are all the options. You have capsules, you got cylinders, you got plane geometry, ring geometry, a torus, a tetrahedron, etc. In this case, I'm just going to be using cubes because cubes are the easiest thing for me to personally learn with when I'm first starting off. So we're just going to create a new 3.box geometry, just like that. And then we can do a new material, and the material is just going to be the thing that gives it some actual texture. Now, I believe there's another argument we can use here. I don't think I actually tried this. Yeah, right here, GitHub Copilot knows what I'm looking for. So you can do a color, which is a hex value. This is going to be 00 for the R, FF for the green. So this is going to be a pure green color, and then 00 for the blue. If you want to change this to like all blue, you could make this an FF and this a 00. Or if you want to make this a gray, you could probably do something like 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. In this case, I'm going to stick to the 0x00, FF00 for the greens. So once we have that, we have this wireframe set up just to sort of give stuff a bit of an outline. But once we do that, we need to actually create a small helper function. Well, we don't need to, but I just like doing this just because it makes this a little bit easier to reuse. So what we're going to do is we're just going to set this.originCube equal to this.createCube, and then we're going to pass in a x value, a y value, and a z value. These are just going to be your coordinates on the 3D plane that we have here. So we'll come down here, we'll create the createCube function, which takes an x, a y, and a z. And then all we really have to do inside of the createCube is going to be a, actually this is already cheating for us, so I'm just going to hit tab thanks to Copilot. We create a const cube, which is equal to a new 3.mesh. This takes in this.geometry and this.material, which we just declared up here. We then can set the position of this to be set to x, y, z. And we don't do the scene add here, but we'll do the scene add after we create this cube, just so that we can put it all in the same place. So we can save that. And of course, now it's going to be upset with us because we need to do a this.originCube. There we go. So now we have our cube being displayed, but nothing is showing up, of course. Well, a couple things we have to do. We want to do a camera position because we have our camera, but we want to like position it in a place where we'll actually be able to see something. So we'll just set this.camera.position, position dot z is equal to, and I think 5 moves it back 5 units. And now we can call another function, which will be this.animate. And this is basically going to be your draw loop, or whatever you want to think about this, your update loop if you're familiar with like C#. And all we really do in this function is just whatever we want to do every frame. So the first thing you usually want to do is say request animation frame, which will take in a this.animate, which is a call to itself. And then we do .bind and we pass in a reference to this. So the reason why we do this is just so that every time it requests an animation frame, it'll then call itself, which causes us to enter that infinite loop so that we always have access to this function. The next thing we can do right here, as it suggests, is do a this.originCube.rotation.x and just increment the rotation along the x and the y by some arbitrary value. The higher the number, the faster it'll rotate. The lower the number, the slower it'll rotate. And then once you have that done, you can then do your this.render.render and pass in this.scene and this.camera. Now, if we come over here and refresh, you can already see something pretty cool here. Of course, we're going to have to refresh to cause this to resize because we're doing the resize in the connect method and not in the animate update loop. So if you want to do it in the animate update loop, that's something to consider. Now, the reason why this has this outline is because of this wireframe true. So if we get rid of that wireframe, now it's a solid box. We can put it back if we want to. It'll be a wireframe again. We can also just set this to false if we would like, or we could even change the color here. So like I was saying, you could make this a, well, let's just declare a couple colors here just for the sake of testing. We'll set red equal to 0x and then this. We can do a green. We can do a blue, and then let's do a gray, which will just be equal to 0x111111. So let's grab the gray color here and pass this in. So you can see it's kind of hard to see. Maybe we want to change this to like a 777777. It's always going to be 6 digits here after the X, and now it's a gray color. You can make it blue if we want to, and you get the idea. This will just allow you to change the color as you see fit. So that's pretty cool, but we can probably do a little bit better. So what do we want to do? Well, let's change this back to green. And then let's maybe grab this origin cube and let's make a second one. And let's see if we can create like a cube with an offset. So let's call this offset cube. And then what do we want to do? Maybe we set the cube to have a position of 2, 2, 2, and just see what happens. So we can refresh and we'll see nothing changes because we're not calling this.scene.add for our new cube. So we're going to grab the offset cube, paste it in here, save this, and now you can see we have this strange cube up here. It's not rotating, so maybe we want to do that. We can just come down here to the animate function, grab this.offsetCube.rotation.x, do a plus equals, .y, do a plus equals, and if we save this, they'll both rotate at the same speed, but maybe we want this one to rotate a little slower. So let's do .003 maybe, and then this bottom one can be 002, and then maybe we don't want them to both spin the same direction, so we make this one a minus equal for both of these. And now you can see this one's rotating this way, this one's rotating this way, and this one's rotating much slower. But maybe we want to move it a bit more, so maybe we mess around with it. We try to figure out where we want to put it. So we try like 3, 3, 2, and we can see that's pretty far up. And then maybe we grab the Z and we set this to -5. You'll see when we set it to -5, it causes it to go into the background here. So if we now change this to 5, 5, -5, it's over a bit more, but it's further back. So you have your depth there. So that's pretty cool. One other thing we can do, I had that cool little image, so let's go ahead and grab that. We can go to Google, go to unsplash.com and just search for, I think the word I searched for was like galaxies. And then you just pick a picture that you like from the galaxies here. Maybe you want to grab, I don't know, like this purpley one here. So we download this, save it to our downloads folder, and then we come over to our browser or our Explorer, app, assets, and images, and then we're just going to drag this into our images. Once it's in our images, we can hit F2 to rename it. We can just call this like space, save it, close it, and then come back over to our Three.js controller. And then all we want to do, because this gets put into our application at a specific directory, if I open up a new tab, we go to localhost port 3000 and we search for /assets/ I think we called it space.jpg. That should open up the image for us. And of course, if I zoom out of the 150% zoom, you can see the full image here. So that's pretty cool. But how do we actually use that here? Well, it's pretty easy. All we really have to do is after we do our scene adds, we can just do a actually we want to do a const background texture is equal to a new 3.texture loader.load. And then this is going to take in a string, and this is just going to go to whatever we just typed. So over here, it was /assets/space.jpg. And then we just paste that in. And then all we have to do is call this.scene.background equals the background texture. And now if we refresh, you can see we have, I mean, it looks a little gaudy, but it's still pretty cool. So we have this working. It looks like we have some text here. We have some rotation in the background, and we can sort of mess around with this a bit more if we want to. Now, one other thing that is covered in the Fireship tutorial was lighting. So maybe you want to add some lighting. That's actually not terribly difficult to add. Basically, all you have to do is either add a point light or an ambient light. I'll cover the point light. I would recommend Fireship's video on the ambient light if you're interested. But basically, all we have to do is call a this.pointLight equals new 3.pointLight. And then this takes in another hex value. So it's going to be 0x and then FF. So 6 Fs. And then we just give this a position, which we're going to set to 3, 3, and -5. And then of course we just come down here and we call this.scene.add and we add the point light. Now you can see nothing changes here, and that's because we're using a material that doesn't reflect light. So what we actually want to do is change this to a mesh standard material. You'll see as soon as we save this and refresh, we start to get those very harsh shadows there. So maybe we want to change this down, make this like a full 7s for our light, which is a little bit dimmer. Maybe you're going for something super artistic, so you just don't want people to be able to see anything in your scene, so you just crank it really far down, or you can even leave it at a higher level. But okay, now we have our light. Now the last couple things we had were a grid and the ability to move around. Now the moving around is interesting because it requires us to go into a GitHub repo. So let's start by just adding that little grid that was going across the bottom. That one's actually not terribly difficult to add. So all we have to do is, after we do our point lights, we just throw in a call to this.lightHelper, which is equal to a new 3.pointLightHelper, which takes in the point light. We then take the point light and what we do is we say this.scene.add, and then we add the light helper. So that'll just give us a small thing that shows us, if we do this right, where the light helper is located, or where the light is located in the scene, which will probably be familiar if you've ever worked in like a 3D modeling tool before. They usually have these little symbols that show you where a light source is located. I forgot the this dot for our light helper here. So now we have this little anchor here that shows us that this is the location of our light source. So if we change this to be like, I don't know, 10, 10, -5, then the anchor is gone. And then as we move this to a lower value, we'll start to see that hopefully pop into place. So that just shows us where our light is coming from. Once we have that, the other thing we can do is add in our controls. Now for this, I'll have a link in the video description, but the basic idea is there's this GitHub repo for Three.js, which has an examples directory. It has JavaScript inside of it with some controls. And then inside of that controls folder is a whole bunch of different control schemes. So you have like a first person controller. If you want to look through your character, you have a drag controller, an orbit controller, a flight controller, all this other stuff. The one we're going to use is the orbit controller, which will just give you some basic like WASD movement type of thing where you can right click to move around. So to do this, we actually come into our Three.js controller, and we can just import the orbit controller directly from the source. So we'll say import orbit controls, and then we want to import this from a npm link, which the way that I grab this is I just come into my, where is it? My config and my import map. And then the import map will have a link to the Three.js download. And all we want to do, and you could of course do this in the import map. I just like doing it here so I can see real quick what I'm using, because I'm not using this permanently. This is just for the sake of an example. But you can come in here, you go after the version, and instead of doing /build, you're going to go to /examples, /JSM, /controls, /orbit controls.js. So after the version number, you're just going to go to whatever your path is to the file you find on Git. You're going to save that, come over here, refresh, nothing's erroring out. That's usually a good sign. Hey, this is Editing Dean. Just real quick, I thought I'd cover this. I kind of glossed over it, but if you are interested in throwing your orbit controls into your import map file, all you really have to do is change this from importing from the URL to just importing from whatever you name it. In this case, I went with 3/examples. You can then come into your import map, and instead of importing from this URL here, all you have to do is type pin and then whatever you named it, so 3/examples, and then you paste in whatever you had here, which was like our orbit controls. So we get rid of the import section, and we just leave it as the import from the orbit controls. You could even grab like the examples or whatever you're interested in. In this case, I just grab the OrbitControls themselves, and then over here, I just import from 3/examples, which is what I named it. If we come over here and refresh, this might be a spoiler, but that's how all of this stuff is working in the background, is it's been imported through this 3/examples. And then once that's done, we can come down to the bottom here, wherever we'd like, maybe below the point helper. Maybe below the point helper, and we can create a grid helper first of all. So we'll say this grid helper is equal to a new grid, and we'll make this, let's say 100 by 100. Then we can just add the grid helper after the light helper. So this scene add actually takes in more than one object. So you can just pass in as many as you would like. So you can pass in your grid helper here as well, which will give you your grid. And if you wanted to, you could even just add in even more items here. Maybe you want to just add all of these in. So you have your origin cube, your offset cube, and your light. So we can do something like this. So we'll just have all 5 of our scene adds right here. And if we refresh, they're all added just fine. That way we don't have to call it 5 times. It's ultimately up to you. It's just a neat little trick. But okay, we have this. Let's now finish up by adding in our controller. So we can come below our background stuff, I guess maybe below the camera position. And we'll say this controls is equal to a new OrbitControls. And then all we need to pass in here is this camera. And then we want to pass in this render.dom element. So that gives us our controls. And then inside of our animate function, we just want to come down here and call this controls.update. And once we have that, we can come in here, refresh. And now if we hold down the right mouse button and move the mouse, we can pan around. If we hold down the left mouse button, we can do a little bit of scrolling. And if we use our zoom, that'll allow us, or our middle mouse button, that'll allow us to zoom in and out. So now we can fully explore our scene and just see what's going on here. So this is pretty cool. It allows you to go straight out of the grid, of course. So you'd have to create some more logic for like your maximum location. But I think this is a pretty good like starting point, because you can pretty much go from what we've covered here to pretty much anything that is covered in like the Three.js documentation or the examples, depending on what you're after. And as you can see, it's pretty easy to just load up one of these real quick and just see what's available, which, I mean, this is pretty impressive considering it's all running in a browser. But yeah, I thought this was pretty cool. I know people have been asking about Three.js for a while, and you know me, I love putting random JavaScript frameworks into Rails in spaghetti code fashion, but I thought this would be pretty neat for whatever projects you're working on that might need some animations. So yeah, hopefully this was helpful, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.